The Pacific Ocean in 1942 was not calm. It was not blue and peaceful like the pictures in travel brochures. It was a world of smoke, oil fires, metal wreckage, and desperate young men trying to stay alive in skies filled with danger. War had turned the ocean into a battlefield. American aircraft carriers moved like floating cities, always alert, always hunted. Japanese carriers and island bases waited like sharks, ready to strike at any moment. Between them, thousands of pilots fought duels in the sky where only skill and instinct kept them breathing. And at the beginning of the war, the Japanese ruled those skies. The Japanese fighter plane, the Mitsubishi A6M0, was a marvel of design. It was light, fast, and could turn tighter than any American aircraft at the time. A skilled Zero pilot could make the plane dance like a bird, twisting and looping through the air with impossible grace. American planes, especially the F-4F Wildcat, were heavier and slower. When an American pilot tried to turn with a Zero, the Zero would always come around faster. And when that happened, the Japanese pilot would slide in behind them. And fire. One burst. One streak of smoke. One body falling into the ocean. Before the war even started, Japanese pilots had trained for years. Their air force believed in mastering flying through repetition, discipline, and endurance. They practiced long-range flights, complex maneuvers, and shooting with deadly accuracy. They flew with pride and confidence. So when the war began, and they started winning quickly, many of them believed they were simply better. They looked at the Americans, young, somewhat inexperienced, and still learning, and they mocked them. In mess halls and briefing rooms, they joked. American pilots fly like they are drunk. Some even wrote home. The enemy does not understand the sky. They only know how to climb into airplanes. And they laughed. Because for a time, they were right. After Pearl Harbor, the United States was shaken. Many planes had been destroyed before even taking off. Bases across the Pacific were falling, the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island. Every time the Zero appeared, squadrons of American fighters went down. Pilots returned to carriers shaken and confused. They had never seen flying like this. Reports kept coming in. Do not turn with a Zero. Do not try to dogfight on equal terms. We do not have the advantage. On carriers like the USS Lexington and USS Yorktown, young pilots whispered. How do you fight something that's better than your plane? There were no easy answers. Among those young pilots was a 22-year-old from Ohio named Jim Hollingsworth. Jim did not grow up dreaming of glory. He came from open fields, fresh air, and quiet mornings. He spent his youth watching hawks circle above farmland, gliding effortlessly through the sky. Flying, to him, was not about power. It was about freedom. When war came, his dream changed, but only slightly. He didn't join the Navy to become a hero. He joined because he couldn't sit at home while the world fell apart. Jim was not loud. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest. He didn't brag. But he had something rare. Patience. Observation. And belief. He listened to every report about the Zero. He studied how Japanese pilots flew. He learned from every mistake others made. While others feared the Zero, Jim wanted to understand it. On one island airstrip in the Pacific, Jim overheard something that stayed with him forever. A captured Japanese pilot, sitting under guard, laughed when he saw the American planes lined up. He said loudly, "These airplanes are pigs. They are heavy. Stupid. The pilots are babies in the sky." The guards ignored him. But Jim heard every word. Not because he was insulted, but because he felt something change inside him. Something settle. Something sharpen. He didn't want revenge. He wanted respect, not just for himself, but for every American pilot who had died fighting with courage. The Japanese believed Americans were clumsy and unskilled. Jim intended to prove them wrong. The ocean continued to burn. Ships sank. Men were lost. The Japanese continued to push forward. But something else was happening, quietly, slowly, behind the scenes. American pilots were learning. They were developing new tactics that did not rely on being faster or turning better. They learned to use their planes' stronger armor, their heavier guns, their ability to dive quickly, and most importantly, teamwork. They didn't need to copy Japanese flying. They needed to fight differently. Jim understood this deeply. And soon, he would prove it in the sky. Because somewhere in the clouds above the Pacific Ocean, a moment was waiting. A moment when one pilot's determination, one maneuver, one decision, would silence the laughter and change everything. Training was brutal. The instructors were harsh, the hours were long, and mistakes were deadly. But nothing in training was as hard as the Pacific itself. The Pacific did not forgive. A pilot might laugh with his friends in the morning, sharing coffee and bread under the hot sun. Then by sunset, his plane could be gone. No body. No funeral. Just an empty seat in the mess hall. Jim lived through this every day. He learned their names. He learned their dreams. And he watched them disappear. But through all the pain, he learned something important. War isn't just about the better machine. It's about the better choices. The Japanese Zero was an incredible plane. It was like a dancer, smooth, light, graceful. In the hands of experienced pilots, it became almost unstoppable. The American F-4F Wildcat, Jim's aircraft, was not graceful. It was slower, heavier, harder to turn, and harder to climb. But it had one thing the Zero did not have: strength. If a Zero took even 1 or 2 bullets in the wrong place, it caught fire. It was built light, and that meant fragile. But the Wildcat was built like a steel fist. It could be hit again, and still fly. Sometimes pilots even returned home with holes in the wings large enough to crawl through. Jim realized. The Zero survives by dancing. The Wildcat survives by enduring. And if you try to dance with a dancer, you lose. But if you hit the dancer before he can move, you win. So Jim developed a new way to fight. He taught pilots. 1. Stay above the Zero. 2. Dive down fast. 3. Fire one clean burst. 4. Pull back up before the Zero can turn. Do not stay and turn. Do not chase. Do not linger. Strike, leave, strike again. It was simple, but only if the pilot was disciplined. Many Americans were used to dogfighting like in movies, close, dramatic, spinning and twisting. They wanted to fight like heroes. Jim taught them to fight like survivors. In war, living is winning. The sun hung bright and sharp in the sky. The ocean below looked peaceful, almost gentle. But this was a battlefield, not a postcard. Jim and a small group of Wildcat pilots were flying patrol above the island. They scanned the horizon. Clouds drifted lazily. Waves shimmered below. Then someone spotted them. Silver shapes. Coming fast. Growing larger. A squadron of Japanese Zeros, at least 12. The radio crackled with tension. Enemy fighters, 2 o'clock high. They've seen us. Jim felt his heart slow, not speed up. This was the moment he had trained for. Among the Zero pilots was Lieutenant Sato Takahashi. He was respected, admired, and feared. He already had 19 victories. To him, American pilots were prey. He saw the Wildcats and smirked. Over the radio, he said. The pigs are here. Let us hunt. His squadron laughed. They believed this would be easy. But Jim was ready. Jim spoke calmly into the radio. Do not turn. Use the dive. No shouting. No fear. Just instructions. His men listened. They tightened formation. They waited. The Zeros dived first, fast and confident, trying to draw the Americans into a turning fight. Jim didn't turn. He dived. Straight down. The Wildcat howled as it picked up speed, faster than the Zero could safely dive. He lined up his shot. He fired once. Just one burst. A Zero's fuel tank ignited. The plane turned into a fireball. The pilot had no time to escape. Down below, the burning plane hit the ocean and disappeared in steam. Jim didn't watch it fall. He was already climbing, back up, higher, faster, out of reach. His wingmen followed. Dive. Fire. Climb. Dive. Fire. Climb. Dive. Fire. Climb. The sky turned into a storm of motion, but controlled motion. The Zeros spun desperately, twisting, searching, trying to pull the Americans into a turning fight. But the Americans refused. They did not play the Japanese game anymore. The balance of the sky changed. For the first time in months, the laughter stopped. The Japanese realized. These Americans were different. Smarter. Disciplined. Dangerous. The battle was no longer easy. And Lieutenant Takahashi, the ace who once mocked the Americans, suddenly found himself the hunted instead of the hunter. Jim was already turning back for another strike. The fight was far from over. But the sky, for the first time, felt equal. And soon, it would tilt. The Japanese pilots were no longer laughing. What they saw in the sky now was not the careless fighting style they had mocked before. The Americans were flying with purpose. They weren't spinning wildly. They weren't trying to match the Zero's movements. They were striking like hammers, fast, controlled, and deadly. This was not luck. This was skill. And it surprised them. Sato Takahashi, the respected Japanese ace, watched Jim's maneuver and understood immediately that this pilot was not ordinary. He saw how Jim refused to fall into the trap of turning. He saw the rise, the dive, the clean shot, and the escape. It was the mark of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. For the first time in the battle, Sato felt something he did not expect. Respect. The sky above Guadalcanal was chaos. It was full of thick black smoke from damaged engines, shining metal fragments of shattered wings, and the flash of tracers streaking through the air like burning ropes. Every moment felt loud enough to shake teeth, even inside the cramped cockpit where the pilot was alone with his breathing and the pounding of his own heart. Jim's squadron kept to the plan he had drilled into them during training. Stay high. Do not turn. Dive when you see a clean shot. Fire once. Climb away before the Zero can swing around. Do not get emotional. Do not chase. Do not try to prove bravery. Survival was not cowardice, it was intelligence. But doing the right thing in training and doing the right thing in the middle of battle are not the same. In combat, instinct can betray you. When you see an enemy just ahead, your hands want to follow. When a Zero swoops past you, every part of your body wants to turn after it. But if you do that, you die. And everyone knew it. One wrong move would mean their plane would fall burning into the ocean below, becoming just another splash of foam on water that swallowed everything. Sato, however, did not act rashly either. He was no ordinary pilot. He was calm, focused, and experienced. He had survived more battles than any of the Americans. He had trained under instructors who believed pain was a teacher. He had learned endurance. He had learned patience. And most of all, he had learned to control the sky by controlling himself. He believed that whoever controlled the turn controlled the fight. And the Zero was the master of the turn. So instead of chasing Jim upward, Sato pulled his plane into a slow, graceful looping circle. His wings almost seemed to draw perfect curves against the blue sky. He was waiting for the Americans to make a mistake. He knew from experience that humans break under pressure long before machines do. He spoke calmly into his radio, telling his formation to hold position. "The Americans will break," he said. "They always break." His pilots believed him. They had seen many Americans lose composure. Under fear, under adrenaline, under the instinct to run. But today was not like those other days. Because today, those American pilots were following Jim. Jim could see Sato circling below. He understood exactly what the Japanese ace was trying to do. Sato was not chasing, he was inviting. He was offering bait. He wanted one American to drop down and try to turn with him. If even one pilot fell for it, the Japanese formation would collapse in on him like a tightening trap, and that pilot would never return. Jim's voice came over the American radio, steady, controlled, completely calm. "Hold altitude," he said. "Don't turn. Don't look at them. Look where we climb. No anger. No stress. No fear. Leadership does not always shout. Sometimes it simply speaks at the right moment." The Wildcats climbed, keeping their advantage. Their engines roared, pushing against gravity, against heat, against exhaustion. Sweat dripped down Jim's back. His hands were steady, but his body was tired. The Pacific sun was hot. The air was thin. Every moment of flight demanded strength. Every second required focus. Down below, Sato continued circling. The Zeros moved with him, elegant and deadly. Their wings caught the sunlight. Their shadows skimmed across the cloud tops. They were waiting for weakness, just 1 second of it. Jim knew his men were afraid. He knew they were tired. He knew that every part of their bodies wanted to act, to fight, to move. But war was not about emotion. War was about discipline. And discipline was harder than courage. The moment stretched. The sky felt like it was holding its breath. Then one American pilot, a young one, only weeks out of training, saw a Zero slip beneath him. The Zero looked alone. Vulnerable. Easy to chase. His pulse jumped. His instincts screamed. He pushed his control stick forward. His Wildcat dipped its nose. Jim saw it instantly. "Hold your altitude," he shouted. But the young pilot was already falling. The trap was sprung. The Japanese formation tightened like a net. Sato's eyes focused. His hand steadied. His Zero rolled gracefully into the dive. Jim's heart dropped, because he knew exactly what would happen next. In that single moment, he learned what separated survival from defeat. And the battle was about to change again. His pilots believed him. They had seen Americans break dozens of times before. But today was different. Jim's voice, equally steady, came over the American radio. "Stay disciplined. Stay above them. Do not chase a turning Zero." His men trusted him. They stayed high. Like wolves watching hawks. But war is not a place where every mind remains steady. Among Jim's men was Danny O'Reilly, just 19 years old. Barely more than a boy. Fresh-faced, nervous, carrying the weight of fear in his heartbeat. He saw a Zero dive after him from behind. He felt the instinct to move, react, turn. His training whispered, "Do not turn." But fear screamed louder. "Turn. Turn now." He pulled the stick, hard. His Wildcat began to circle. Jim saw it instantly. And his stomach collapsed. Because once you turn with a Zero, you are trapped. Danny was now locked in a shrinking spiral against a faster, lighter plane. Jim dove, trying to reach him. The Japanese pilots saw the mistake too. 3 Zeros broke formation and dove after Danny. The sky tightened. The trap was closing. Danny's breathing turned into short, panicked gasps. His voice shook over the radio. "Jim, I can't break free." Jim's voice came through, steady and controlled. "Danny, listen to me. Roll right. Push down. Dive. Now." But Danny hesitated, 1 second too long. Tap 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 tap. Bullets ripped through his tail. Smoke began pouring out behind him. His aircraft wasn't destroyed yet, but it was dying. And the Zeros circled like vultures. Jim felt something rise inside him, something dark, sharp, and burning. Not fear. Not panic. Determination. Jim pushed his throttle all the way forward. His engine howled like a wounded animal. His Wildcat shuddered as he forced it past its comfort limits. He dove, straight through the Japanese formation, again. But this dive was different. This time he wasn't aiming at any random Zero. He was aiming at Sato Takahashi. Because Jim understood something. If you beat the leader, the rest will hesitate. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for respect. America versus Japan. Experience versus ingenuity. Mockery versus resolve. The two pilots locked eyes as they closed distance, separated only by glass and sky. Sato had seen hundreds of American pilots. But none had flown like this. He spoke quietly into his radio. "This one is dangerous. Dogfights are often chaotic storms of many planes. But every war in the sky eventually narrows down to 2 minds. 2 wills. 2 men." Jim pulled his Wildcat up into a steep climb, slowing. Sato rolled his Zero and dove down toward him, aggressive. Their planes drew spirals around each other, carving invisible trails into the air. But Jim did not turn tightly. He forced vertical movement, climbing and diving, pushing the fight into the one area where the Wildcat could match the Zero. Sato recognized it. This American was not panicking. He was thinking. Sato smiled, not in mockery, but in admiration. This was the opponent he had been waiting for. He said softly, "Come, American. Show me what you have." Jim and Sato danced through the sky, one climbing, the other diving, switching roles every second. They passed within meters of each other, guns flashing, engines roaring so loud they shook the air. But neither scored a clean hit. This was no longer pilot versus pilot. This was craft versus discipline. Instinct versus experience. Respect versus pride. Below them, the other American and Japanese pilots paused, just for a moment, to watch. Because even in war, there are duels that feel like legend while they are still happening. High above the Pacific clouds, Jim and Sato circled each other like ancient warriors. The air seemed to hold its breath. Jim could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips, in the stick, in the wings themselves. Sato was not just any pilot, he was deliberate, calm, and practiced. He didn't waste motion. He didn't rush. Every second of the duel, he was watching Jim. Testing him. Waiting for a mistake. Waiting for that tiny flaw that would allow the Zero to slide behind the Wildcat and fire a single clean burst that would end the fight. Jim knew it. So Jim did not look at Sato. He did not try to predict Sato's moves based on fear or instinct. He watched the sky itself. The clouds. The sun. The angles. The energy in their relative positions. Because Jim understood something most pilots never learned. A dogfight is not about who moves faster. It is about who controls the geometry of the sky. While the duel raged, Danny O'Reilly's damaged plane continued to fall. It spiraled, not fast enough to crash yet, but too fast to level out. Inside the cockpit, his hands were shaking. His oxygen mask was fogging with his breath. His ears rang with the echo of gunfire and engine strain. He whispered, voice trembling, "I don't want to die." He was only 19. He had told the recruiter he was 21. He had lied to get into the war. Now the war was threatening to take him. His plane was losing altitude, losing strength, losing time. But Danny did not give up. He pushed the nose down, trying to stabilize the dive. His wings wobbled. His engine coughed. But the plane did not crash. Not yet. Because somewhere inside him, beneath the fear and the pain, there was still hope. The duel could not last forever. Fuel was burning. Ammunition was low. Engines were overheating. Sato knew this. So he changed the rhythm. The moment Sato began his maneuver, the sky itself seemed to grow still. He was not diving. He was not climbing. He was doing something far more controlled, far more skillful. He was performing a maneuver the Japanese pilots had mastered long before the war began, the high yo-yo, a rising arc that stole energy from the climb and returned it as power in the dive. It was a move meant to control not only the plane, but the opponent's choices. To the Japanese pilots below, watching the motion from their cockpits, Sato's climb looked almost graceful. His Zero moved like a dancer, smooth, balanced, effortless. He rose above Jim just enough to gain a higher position, then slowed slightly, letting gravity grip the wings. Executed correctly, it was elegant. Executed perfectly, it was deadly. And Sato was known for perfection. Jim saw it happening. He recognized every step of the maneuver. He had studied it. He had seen it destroy pilots with more experience than him. Sato's Zero climbed. Jim's Wildcat followed, but not too closely. He did not try to match the Zero's angle. He did not try to match the Zero's turn. He simply watched. The climb. The curve. The speed bleed. The moment of weightlessness. He knew what was coming. Sato cut throttle. Just a touch. Just enough to make his plane hang in the sky for the smallest fraction of time. The Zero slowed, almost floating. It seemed harmless. Peaceful. Then Sato pushed the nose down. The Zero dropped, not falling, striking. He came straight for Jim. A perfect dive. A perfect angle. A perfect kill shot. From below, Japanese pilots shouted through their radios. "Takahashi-san. You have him." From above, the American squadron watched with their breath held tight inside their chests. To them, it looked hopeless. Jim was caught. There was no room to turn. No room to outrun. No room to climb. The Zero was faster now. Sato had gravity, position, and speed. He had everything. Jim had 1 second. Not 2. Not 1.5. Just 1. In that single second, his mind processed every possible move. Pull left. Sato would simply track him and fire. Death. Pull right. The Zero would follow the arc and fire. Death. Try to turn. The Wildcat could not turn with the Zero. That was the first lesson of the Pacific Air War. Guaranteed death. There was no escape. No safe move. No trick flight path. So Jim did something that went against every instinct of survival. He rolled the plane upside down. And instead of fleeing the Zero's dive, he dove straight toward Sato. 2 planes. Nose to nose. Both closing at hundreds of miles per hour. The sky narrowed into a tunnel of blue and sunlight and death. Every instinct a human being possesses screamed to pull away. The body wants to survive. The hands want to move away from danger, not toward it. But Jim had learned something on the quiet farm in Ohio, staring at birds drifting above the wheat fields. Sometimes survival means flying into the storm instead of away from it. Sato saw it. He saw the American pilot doing something no one should dare to do, inviting danger instead of fleeing from it. For the first time in the battle, Sato hesitated. It was not a full second. It was not even a fourth of a second. It was half a heartbeat. But in aerial combat, half a heartbeat is an eternity. The Zero came screaming downward. The Wildcat came screaming upward. The two aircraft streaked toward each other like steel meteors. At the last instant, when collision seemed certain, Jim slammed the left rudder pedal. Not to turn away, but to slide. The plane didn't roll. It didn't dive. It didn't climb. It shifted, cutting sideways through the air like a blade across silk. The Zero shot past him. Close enough that Jim could see Sato's face. Not through glass. Not through reflection. Face to face. Sato's eyes widened. Shock. Recognition. Understanding. In that moment, both men knew. Jim had just risked his life on instinct, and survived. And more importantly, Sato had missed. The Zero no longer had position. No longer had angle. No longer had control. For the first time in the fight, Sato Takahashi was exposed. Jim didn't need to aim long. He didn't have to chase. He didn't have to think. He had trained for this exact moment. His thumb rested on the trigger as though it belonged there. He squeezed for less than 1 second. A burst of bullets, short, controlled, perfect, left the Wildcat's guns. They tore through the sky and struck the Zero's engine cowling. A small spark. Then another. Then flame. The Zero, once the symbol of Japanese dominance in the Pacific sky, caught fire. Sato's plane rolled, smoke trailing behind it, a bright streak across the endless blue. Inside, Jim felt no joy. No triumph. No victory. Just silence. He respected Sato. He had admired him from afar. This was not a kill of anger. It was the ending of a duel. A duel of skill. Of patience. Of will. The burning Zero began to fall toward the ocean. The rest of the Japanese formation wavered. Their voices on the radio no longer mocked. They no longer laughed. They no longer called the Americans pigs, or clumsy flyers, or lucky survivors. They had seen something undeniable. They had seen discipline. They had seen precision. They had seen courage. They had seen a pilot who refused to be underestimated. Jim watched the Zero descend, trailing fire, until it touched the shining surface of the Pacific. It vanished into steam. The sky went quiet. And slowly, one by one, the Japanese planes turned away. They did not retreat because they were beaten. They retreated because they had witnessed something new. Respect. The kind earned only in the hardest way a soldier can earn anything. In battle. Jim did not celebrate when he returned to base. He landed. He climbed out of his aircraft. He walked across the flight deck. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. But from the weight of what had happened. He had survived. And he had changed the way American pilots would fly. From that day on, the Pacific skies were different. No more reckless turning. No more desperate fighting. No more blind courage. Only discipline. Strategy. Precision. The Japanese pilots no longer mocked the Americans. Because they had seen the truth. The Americans were learning. And once they learned, they would not stop. BRRT. Bullets tore through the Zero's tail and wing. Sato felt the plane shudder. Smoke fluttered. His controls stiffened. His speed dropped. The duel was no longer equal. Jim had won the geometry. But he had not killed Sato. Not yet. Sato steadied his aircraft as best he could. He could still fly, but not fight. He looked at Jim's plane circling around for another pass. He expected the American to finish him. But Jim didn't fire. He held formation, wings level, as if acknowledging the duel had ended. This was not mercy. This was honor. Sato, breathing slowly, spoke into his radio to his men. Do not engage. The fight is finished. Return home. His pilots obeyed. Not because they were ordered, but because they understood what had happened. The Americans had not gotten lucky. The Americans had grown. They had learned. They had earned respect. Sato tilted his damaged plane into a slow glide back toward his carrier. Jim turned and began searching for Danny. The battle, this one, at least, was over. The battle had scattered everyone. Smoke trails and falling debris marked where planes had gone down. The ocean below looked calm, almost peaceful, a cruel contrast to the violence above. Jim circled, scanning the sky and sea for Danny. His fuel was low. His ammunition was nearly gone. His engine was running hot. But none of that mattered. Because Danny was still out there, spiraling toward the ocean in a wounded plane. Jim spoke into his radio. Danny, answer me. Where are you? At first, there was only static. Then, very faintly. I'm here. I'm trying. Jim's chest tightened. Danny's voice was weak, fading, like someone trying to speak while their world tilted sideways. Jim's eyes swept the ocean again. Then he saw it, a thin trail of smoke cutting downward toward the water. Danny's plane. Jim pointed his Wildcat and flew toward it. Inside Danny's cockpit everything was chaos. The world around him shook and roared as if it were coming apart all at once. His ears rang sharply from the gunfire and explosions that had echoed just minutes earlier. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest like a hammer. His arms trembled so badly that even keeping his hands on the controls felt like lifting weights. The entire instrument panel in front of him flickered with warnings, glowing red lights that told him his aircraft was no longer a safe machine. It was a wounded creature trying desperately to stay in the sky. The smell of smoke filled the cockpit, burning oil mixed with the harsh tang of metal. He tasted it with every breath. His lungs felt tight. His plane had taken hits during the battle. Not one hit. Not two. Several. Holes in the wings. Smoke streaming behind. A rattling vibration that was getting worse every second. But Danny was still alive. Barely. He tried to level the plane, to bring it back under control, but the aircraft kept dropping, inch by inch, losing altitude. The engine coughed like an animal gasping for breath. The propeller's rhythm was uneven and slow. The wheels were damaged. The tail was unstable. The Wildcat was descending whether he wanted it to or not. Danny whispered to himself through the haze of adrenaline and fear. Come on, just a little longer, just stay together, his voice cracked. The ocean below looked endless. Blue. Deep. Cold. If he crashed wrong, he would not survive. The sea could kill just as easily as enemy bullets. The horizon tilted as the plane wobbled. He tried to steady it with tiny, shaky movements of the control stick. But his arms were weak. He felt like he had no strength left. The ocean began rising toward him faster. He didn't have minutes to think or correct. He had seconds. Jim came in beside him. Jim's plane flew so close that the two wingtips nearly touched. It was dangerous, extremely dangerous, but Jim made it look controlled, precise. He took one look through the cockpit glass and saw Danny slumped forward, pale, dazed, barely conscious. Jim's voice came across the radio, steady, firm, unshaken by fear. "Danny. Listen to me. You're going to put her down on the water. Belly landing. No wheels. Keep her straight." Danny could barely speak. His voice shook like a child's. I can't." Jim did not raise his voice. But there was steel in it. Strength. Not anger. Determination. "Yes, you can. I'm not letting you die here. Not today. Not like this." Something in Danny responded to that voice. Something buried deep in him. Trust. Jim stayed by his side, pacing him, guiding him, flying almost as if the two aircraft were tied together. The ocean now filled Danny's entire field of vision. Nothing but rolling blue. Jim continued guiding him. "Throttle down, easy, hold it, steady, now pull up just a little." Danny pulled. The nose lifted slightly. Just enough. The underside of the Wildcat struck the water. A huge spray burst up around it. The aircraft skipped across the surface like a thrown stone. It slammed. Skidded. Shuddered. Danny's head snapped forward as the safety harness dug sharply across his shoulders. His teeth rattled. His vision blurred. The plane slowed. Slowed more. And came to a stop, floating, barely staying above the surface. Danny gasped for air. He was alive. Jim let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. But they were not done. Not even close. The Pacific Ocean was not a gentle place. A plane floating in the water was a sinking clock. At any minute, the wreck could flip. The fuel could ignite. Waves could pull Danny under before help arrived. Jim circled above. He radioed for rescue. "Mayday. Pilot down. Send rescue. Immediate." Silence. Static. Then finally the answer came. "Rescue launch dispatched. 15 minutes. 15 minutes." It felt like a lifetime. Danny didn't have 15 minutes. His plane was sinking slowly, water pouring into bullet holes and open seams. Jim watched. He looked from the ocean to the sky. Looked at Danny. Looked back at the water. He made a decision without hesitation. Every pilot had been trained not to ditch their plane unless absolutely necessary. Planes were expensive. Pilots were rare. Training took months. Machinery took resources. To survive a water landing took immense skill. But Jim didn't care. Skill or no skill, cost or no cost, he was going. He lowered his landing gear, then stopped. No wheels on a water landing. He retracted them, steadied his breathing, and brought his Wildcat down toward the waves. The sea rushed up to meet him. The plane hit the surface hard. The impact was like slamming into a wall of moving liquid. Water exploded upward, drenching the plane. The cockpit jolted violently. But Jim's aircraft floated, wounded but intact. The moment the plane settled onto the waves, Jim tore open the cockpit hatch. The cold ocean air hit him like ice. Salt spray stung his face. He climbed out onto the wing, water washing over his boots. The ocean was freezing. But he didn't slow. He jumped in, the cold swallowing him instantly. His breath seized in his chest from the shock, but he forced his body to move. Stroke after stroke, he swam toward Danny's sinking plane. The waves kept rising and falling around him. Salt water splashed into his mouth. He coughed but kept going. No hesitation. No fear. Only purpose. Danny's plane was now half underwater. The cockpit glass reflected sunlight before disappearing beneath the waves. Jim reached him just as the last part of the aircraft slipped below. He grabbed Danny under the shoulders and held his head above the surface. Danny coughed, choking on the seawater. Jim spoke to him with calm reassurance. "I've got you. I've got you, kid." They floated together as waves rolled over them. Minutes passed. Long minutes. Exhausting minutes. Jim did not let go. Danny leaned against him, weak, shaking, barely conscious. The rescue boat finally appeared, cutting through the waves. Sailors hauled both men aboard. Danny collapsed, exhausted but alive. Jim sat beside him, soaked, trembling, water dripping from his flight suit, his hair plastered to his head. He had lost his aircraft. He had risked his life. He had swum through freezing waves. The sailors looked at him in disbelief. One of them finally asked the question. "Why'd you go back for him, sir?" Jim looked at Danny, the young pilot who had flown into death and survived. The boy who had tried. The boy who trusted him. Jim answered quietly. "Because he would have done the same for me." And that was the truth. Not strategy. Not orders. Not patriotism. Brotherhood. The kind of bond that only forms when men face the sky together, when they live and fight and bleed in a world of endless blue where survival is never guaranteed. Danny lived because Jim believed he could. Jim lived because Danny fought beside him. And the war would remember that day. Not because of the battle. Not because of the planes. But because of the choice one man made in the vast empty ocean when nobody was watching. The choice to say, "Not today. Not my friend. Not while I'm here." When Jim and Danny were brought back to the carrier, the deck crew stopped what they were doing. Men who had seen battles, explosions, and death, every day, now stood silently. Some nodded. Some whispered. Some understood without words. Danny was taken to the infirmary. Jim was told to get out of his wet flight suit. But before he left the deck, something happened that he never forgot. The Admiral, a stern, quiet man, stepped toward him, stopped, and raised his hand in salute. Not as a superior. But as a man to another man who had shown courage. Jim saluted back. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Word of the duel traveled fast. On the American carrier, pilots spoke in quiet, amazed voices. "Did you hear what Jim did? He went head-on with a Japanese ace, and won. He landed in the ocean for Danny. He just jumped in." Older pilots, the ones who had seen too many battles to be impressed by much, nodded and said, "That's how it's supposed to be done." On the Japanese carrier, the story spread too. Pilots gathered around Sato as he returned, his plane damaged, smoke still clinging to his uniform. They expected anger. Shame. Silence. Instead, Sato spoke simply. "The Americans have learned. They are no longer the pilots we once mocked." There was no insult in his voice. Only respect. Because in that duel, he had not lost to luck, he had lost to skill, patience, and courage. And every pilot, on both sides, understood what that meant. The war in the sky had changed. When Jim wrote his mission report, he did not talk about personal heroics. He wrote about tactics. Keeping altitude. Refusing to turn with zeros. Using dives and climbs. Managing energy in the fight. His report was copied. Then copied again. Then taught in pilot classrooms. Across the Pacific, American pilots began learning how to fight in the air, not just fly. Young recruits repeated Jim's words. "Do not fight the zero where it is strong. Fight it where you are strong." The Americans stopped playing by the enemy's rules. And soon, they stopped losing. Danny lived. But it took weeks of rest before he could walk the deck again. When he finally returned to the hangar, his squadron cheered. Not loud. Not wild. Just a simple, powerful acknowledgement. You made it back. Danny knew he had come close. Closer than he liked. But he also knew something else. Jim didn't save him because he was lucky. Jim saved him because they were brothers in the sky. Not by blood. But by trust. Danny never forgot that. Not for the rest of his life. Years passed. The war dragged on. Cities burned. Ships sank. Thousands of young men fought battles that most of the world would never truly understand. And one day, finally, the war ended. Some men went home. Some did not. Some carried scars you could see. Others carried scars that were invisible, but deeper. Jim and Danny returned to the United States. They did not give speeches. They did not brag. They simply lived. Quietly. Gratefully. Knowing what it meant to hold another human life in your hands. Decades later, long after the war had ended, Jim attended an international aviation gathering in Japan. Pilots from both sides met. Shook hands. Shared stories. Laughed. Remembered. There was an older Japanese man there. Gray hair. Calm eyes. A polite smile. He introduced himself. I am Sato Takahashi. Jim froze. Then smiled. They shook hands. The room grew quiet. Because everyone knew who these men were. Two pilots who had once tried to kill each other, standing side by side. Sato said. I learned something important that day. Jim replied. So did I. And they both understood. Their duel had never been about hatred. It had been about respect. About skill. About courage. About the thin, fragile humanity that still survives in the middle of war. Today, pilots in training all over the world learn tactics from that era. They learn. Do not fight your enemy where you are weak. Fight where you are strong. Protect your wingman. Never leave someone behind. But most importantly, courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing the right thing while afraid. Jim's dive. Danny's survival. Sato's respect. These moments didn't win the entire war. But they changed how the war was fought. And that change saved lives. Thousands of them. Time moves on. Planes rust. Carriers are scrapped. Men grow old and pass away. But the stories, the ones born in smoke and fire and impossible courage, remain. Somewhere, in the quiet dawn sky over the Pacific, the wind still carries the echoes of one duel. Two planes. Two men. Two nations. One moment that changed everything. And if you listen closely, the sky still whispers. Do not turn with the zero. Climb. Dive. Fight with your mind. And protect your brother.